What's happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics, and today we react to the Ramones' self-titled debut album, brought to us by our friend, longtime supporter, and patron of the channel, Evan David. Thank you, Evan David. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons who make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out that Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. We couldn't do it without the patrons. All right, if you've never been with us before for an Evan David reaction, he's got all this great info at the start, all this background of the band and how the album came about. And then we're going to get into the music, obviously, into the album. But the music won't be in the video because it'll get copywritten. So go ahead if you want to follow along with the music, and I suggest that you do. Check out that Vimeo link below. Go ahead and click on it. The full reaction is right there. All right, let's jump into it. These are all Evan David's words. I don't do any research on his because they're so thorough. Rock and roll legend has it that the genesis of the Ramones' legendary, iconic first studio album can be traced back at least 2 years prior to its eventual release in April of 1976 to the band's formation in the Forest Hills area of Queens, New York in mid-1974 by four alienated local youths named Jeffrey Hyman, a.k.a. future singer Joey Ramone, John Cummings, a.k.a. future guitarist Johnny Ramone, Douglas Colvin, a.k.a. future bassist Dee Dee Ramone, and Thomas Erderly, a.k.a. future drummer-producer Tommy Ramone. The first usage of the Ramones pseudonym itself is usually ascribed to Dee Dee, who in turn allegedly was inspired by Paul McCartney's use of the same name when booking into hotels back in the Silver Beatles stage of his earlier musical career. As Johnny Ramone put it many years later, quote, "The way we were going to be using it was to create a sense of unity, a bond of sorts." By common consent, however, much of the original impetus for forming the band that became known as Ramones, in fact, came from Tommy, who had already been part of a high school garage band called the Tangerine Puppets, back alongside Johnny in the mid-'60s. According to Tommy himself, by 1974, quote, "I seen the New York Dolls and I saw how exciting they were, despite the fact that they weren't really virtuoso musicians. So the idea hit me that I knew these great kids from Queens that I thought would make a great band because they were so unusual. But they were kind of afraid to put a band together because they weren't particularly virtuoso musicians. I was originally their manager. It was a trio. Joey was playing drums. Then we realized Joey was the best singer, so we brought in some drummers, and they didn't get what we wanted. So I tried playing the drums, then we just sort of gelled. Johnny, on the other hand, himself later recalled that Tommy, quote, "talked us into starting a band. He was bugging me and Dee Dee for about a year or so. We told him it was sick, and we shouldn't do that." As the band continued to take shape, meanwhile, it became increasingly clear that the Ramones' seemingly simple, if not outright primitive, chosen method of musical expression would, whether made through deliberate stylistic choice or out of sheer necessity due to their lack of musical skill, nevertheless stand in almost complete contrast to the prevailing emphasis on highly skilled displays of instrumental prowess that characterized the more prestigious technical types of rock music that were in vogue at the time. As Johnny later explained, "I saw where the musicianship was going at the time. It was the drug era coming into rock and roll, so everyone was getting into the overindulgence of their playing. With the long solos, it felt like no way you would ever be able to play like this. Even if you have the talent, you got to sit there for like 15 years practicing." And all of a sudden, I went to see the New York Dolls play, and I was seeing bands now that were what rock and roll was supposed to be, how great they could sound, and how great they could be with limited musicianship. Such sentiments would later be echoed by the Ramones' future art director and designer of their iconic presidential seal with baseball bats logo, Arturo Vega, who recalled how, in his view, quote, "rock and roll was the tool or the weapon that young people had. And it was just kind of breaking down barriers and taboos and prohibitions. And, just blowing people's minds. And that was great. And all of a sudden, by 1973, none of that is happening anymore. And then here come the Ramones. And it's like, all right, now we're going to start all over again. And let's try to get it right this time." They were disgusted with the way things were being done and where rock and roll was going. Consciously, they were trying to do something that would bring rock and roll back to its roots. To begin with, meanwhile, the Ramones would start putting such lofty yet down-to-earth musical ideals into practice by recording a 15-track demo in a small Long Island studio in late 1974, which would itself ultimately serve as a blueprint in turn for what would eventually become their first full-blown studio album, this album that we're about to do, right? Tommy Ramone later recalled how recording of said demo, quote, "went pretty smooth. It felt like we were making important music. We knew we didn't sound like anyone else. It was funny and smart and good. We listened to old Beatles records, and because they were mono and then stereo, the vocals would go on one side and the guitar on the other. So that's what we did." Moreover, and despite, or even perhaps because of, the frankly chaotic nature of their early performances at various New York venues, like the soon-to-be legendary punk breeding ground of CBGB's in downtown Manhattan, by this point the Ramones had nevertheless already also began to develop a passionate live following of their own. Owner of CBGB's Hilly Crystal would later following recall how, quote, their first gig was terrible, man. They had terrible gear. Everything was loose, their wires and everything. And they'd start and they'd stop and they couldn't get through a song and they were yelling at each other on stage. It was a comedy of errors, you might say. It was not an auspicious first set, no. But whatever happened, they were just going to keep going and not stop. So nobody ever did that before with these short little bouncy songs played at full speed as loud as they could get it. And it just went one song into the other with maybe 1, 2, 3, 4. It caused a little bit of a sensation. It's a little different. Nobody else did it. They were trying to look mean and nasty, but they were having fun. So that combination with the high velocity drive, I think it startled people. And so within a short time, the place was packed. Right? You just do something different, man. Something totally different, and word of mouth spreads. And that's how it happens. Indeed, it was a sheer live passion that they evoked, which finally helped to attract record company attention to the Ramones, with rave reviews from the likes of A&R man Craig Leone, publicist Danny Fields, and Linda Stein, who was the wife of the head of Sire Records, Seymour Stein, all of which ultimately persuaded the latter to sign the band to the Sire label in late 1975. As Seymour Stein himself will later recall, quote, I'd heard so many things about the Ramones that I didn't know what to expect. I certainly expected to see something visually exciting, and it was. I love their songs and I love them at first sight. It was a great stroke of luck for me, end quote. Prior to that, as Tommy Ramone put it, quote, we were kind of a rough and tumble band at the time, and every record company in New York turned us down. Sire Records decided to take a chance on us, So with the smallest budget in history, we made the first album. All of their previous frustrations would not be in vain, however, for as the aforementioned Arturo Vega would later put it, quote, the Ramones had already been playing live for the entire year of 1975, and the sound was complete. I would say that by the time the Ramones got into the studio to do the first album, their sound had already come together. And I could tell that Tommy was being very loyal to this and trying to keep it very real and very tied to what the Ramones sounded like live. Probably even Tommy himself got caught by surprise by the limitations of translating the songs with all their might and power. Johnny's impatience started to come alive right there and then. Johnny wanted things done immediately. I think Joey was enjoying it very much. I think that Joey didn't mind going through whatever it took, to make sure that everything was going to be all right. Johnny was the opposite, but Johnny was so efficient. The style of what he was doing just lent itself to, do it fast, do it quick, do it right. And Johnny always did it right. Small wonder then that the Ramones' debut album would ultimately take a little more than a week to actually record in January, February 1976, with a total budget amounting to only $6,400, which is roughly equivalent to about $35,000 today money, 2024 when I'm recording this. As Tommy Ramone later recalled, we felt it important that we make the album, good. So we were very serious about it and we understood what was at stake. We did it very fast, very cheaply with engineers who had never heard anything like that because no one has ever heard anything like what we were playing, combined with the fact that we had 12 hours to mix the whole album. It was Joey Ramone, however, who would perhaps best sum up the sheer scale of the band's creative and technical achievement as, quote, doing an album in a week and bringing it in for $6,400 was unheard of, especially since it was an album that really changed the world. It kicked off punk rock and started the whole thing, as well as us, end quote. Indeed, as Ramones biographer Everett True once put it, quote, the 14 songs in the 1976's Ramones debut album are a blueprint for everything that followed. Relationship songs, horror songs, breakup songs, drug songs, party songs, unrequited love songs, and war imagery songs. The whole gamut of teen confusion in a microcosm. Life reduced to its essentials. Their debut album was brutal, funny, hard, unrelenting, and most of all, human. Thus, while the Ramones' debut album would initially prove to be something of a flop when measured purely in terms of its chart success, reaching no higher than number 111 in the U.S. Billboard charts following its release in 1976, it has since become so iconically influential an album that over the decades since that while it would have finally achieved gold record status in the U.S. almost 4 decades later in 2014, the true extent of both its musical and even its wider cultural legacy is perhaps truly incalculable. So think about this. It took until 2014 to even sell 500,000 copies. So when people talk about how famous the Ramones are, this guy, I don't ever buy it, right? And now tons of people wear shirts now of the Ramones because it's become an iconic thing the last 10 years. But they don't really know who they are because they never achieved success, right? Musical success, chart success, fame, none of that, right? They have it now, but they didn't have it at the time, just an FYI. After all, no less an authority than the Clash's frontman Joe Strummer once said that, quote, if that first Ramones record hadn't existed, I don't know that we could have built a punk scene here in the UK, because it filled a vital gap, if you like, between the death of the old pop rocking scene and the advent of punk, end quote. Elsewhere, and doubtless echoing many of this album's other listeners over the years, future Ramones drummer Mark Bell, a.k.a. Marky Ramone, would himself recall that, quote, I never heard anything like this before in my life. I was blown away. It was something I never heard before. This was so stripped down and so powerful that at one point I said I wished I was in this band, end quote. While future Ramones producer Daniel Ray in turn once described how when he and his friends first heard the album, quote, like a lot of people, we sort of laughed and looked at each other and couldn't stop staring at the cover. That's all we could listen to. Instantly made half of our album collection obsolete, end quote. As such, therefore, it's perhaps unsurprising, given the latter quote, that music writer David Hepsworth has since measurably described the Ramones' debut in suitably tongue-in-cheek fashion as, quote, one of the best jokes ever played at the expense of the dignity of the LP record. They should have quit as soon as they finished this because they could never hope to improve on it. Nevertheless, that's end quote. Nevertheless, it is a great relief of both myself and many other Ramones fans worldwide that the band didn't in fact quit after their iconic debut, but would instead go on to record a further 13 studio albums over the next 2 decades before finally calling it quits in 1995. The next 4 of which, Leave Home in 1977, Rocket to Russia in 1977, Road to Ruin in 1978, and Evan David's own personal favorite Ramones album, Into the Century in 1980, are currently scheduled to form my next few months of RTTC review requests. That's right, we're just going to run them month by month. And I hope that both Sean and the rest of the RTTC community and beyond will join us in both enjoying all 5 albums in succession and engaging in productive discussion of both their merits and those of the Ramones as a whole in their respective comments below. All right, I remind you at the start, but I remind you again, the music won't be in the video, but it's going to be at a Vimeo link below. Check it out. Follow along with us. Let's jump into it. All right, we'll start it off, of course, with the album opener. You see it below, the iconic Blitzkrieg Bop. First released as a non-charting single in February 1976, this overpowering rock and roll rallying cry was apparently intended by its original composer, Tommy Ramone, to be what Everett True describes as, quote, a straightforward glitter stomp with the Bane bubblegum teen-age lust of the Bay City Rollers Saturday Night, reduced down to a few simple, aggressive words and harmonies. It remains one of the catchiest of all the punk-era songs, end quote. Drawing perhaps on his childhood memories of living in post-war West Germany as an army brat, however, it was in fact Dee Dee who both came up with the song's World War II-inspired title, as well as rewriting some of its other lyrics in a similarly warlike manner. Example, what was originally "They're shouting in the back now" became "Shoot 'em in the back now," and so on. In any case, fascistic connotations or no, it's hard to imagine a more appropriate title for a song whose sheer pace and power truly made it as revolutionary in musical terms as the original Blitzkrieg was on the battlefield, and its impact on the listener remains as irresistibly explosive as ever, even to this day, as I hope you will agree. All right, I'm in the lyrics up as always. Thanks again, Evan David. All right, Blitzkrieg Bop, so iconic, right? I mean, this song failed to chart. Their singles did not chart, but this song is so iconic now. And what a great choice to start off your first album, right? I mean, Rolling Stone has this album number 47 in their 500 greatest albums of all time. They also placed this album number 1 on the greatest debut albums of all time. And I think this is part of the reason why starting off with this song just gets you kicked right into it. All right, next up we have Beat on the Brat. According to its composer, Joey Ramone, this violently rocking guilty pleasure of a tune originated, quote, when I lived in Forest Hills with my mom and brother. It was a middle-class neighborhood with a lot of rich, snotty women who had horrible, spoiled brat kids. There's a playground with women sitting around and a kid screaming. A spoiled, horrible kid just running around rampant with no discipline whatsoever. Kind of kid you just want to kill. You know, Beat on the Brat with a baseball bat just came out. I just wanted to kill him, end quote. Interestingly, this is perhaps only the second song that Joey ever wrote, but as Tommy once said, its melodic and chord changes are so brilliant and unique that he's already a virtuoso songwriter by about his second song. So catchy. It starts out with the chorus. I mean, there's not much to this, but the instrumentation, the melody, it's so catchy, right? It just has to be simple. Now, Dee Dee explained the song a little bit different than Joey did. He said it was about how Joey saw a mother, quote, going after a kid with a bat in his apartment building's lobby and wrote a song about it. So either way, a great song. Next up is Judy as a Punk, once described by Everett True as, quote, a warped tale of interpersonal relationships written about 2 crazed Ramones fans who were local juvenile delinquents. At a mere 1 minute and 32 seconds, this barnstorming tune bears the perhaps dubious distinction of being the shortest song on an album that would become infamous for the machine gun style brevity of its tunes. but it nevertheless remains a classic example of why even the shortest Ramones songs, in fact, often possess hidden depths or far more than first met the eye, or rather the ear. For as Tommy once recalled, we were rehearsing some of the songs and Dee Dee and Joey were running down Judy is a Punk. It's the first time I heard it and I never heard anything like this. This was something that was futuristic and I said, what is this? What are these lyrics they're singing? And what is this melody? What is this crazy harmony, you know? And then it's all gelling. And I'm listening to this and I'm going, this is brilliant stuff. And from then, you know, I became very serious because it wasn't just a glitter rock band like 50 other glitter rock bands. This was something fantastic. Just a very simple song. Judy's a punk, or Jackie's a punk, Judy is a runt. They both went down to Berlin, joined the Ice Capades. And I don't know why, perhaps they'll die. Oh yeah, but they don't really enunciate a lot of the word. You know, it's so catchy. Second verse, same as the first, they do the same thing. Then they have the chorus. Third verse, different from the first. It's a little bit different, and then the chorus. But they pack a lot into a minute 32, which is what punk does, right? And they give a blueprint for that. Next up, we have I Wanna Be Your Boyfriend. Later releases a non-charting single in September of 1976. While this old school tribute to the early 60s girl group style teenage love songs was in fact written by Tommy rather than by Joey, it remains the case that this is a perhaps surprisingly charming example of the kind of tough guy romanticism that Joey would often seek to evoke in his own writing in future years, and perhaps an ample musical demonstration of how, as Arturo Vega once put it, quote, with Joey, when you were in front of him, you could either decide that he was a very ugly guy or that he was delicate to the point of being extremely beautiful, so that I could look at him from a certain angle and go, oh, this is what girls see in him. I think listening to this on your turntable in 1976, it would have been shocking when this song came on after the first three. This has got a 12-string guitar in it. It's got a glockenspiel. It's got tubular bells. So it shows you the other things they can do, right? Just dialing it way back. Really good song. Next up, we have Chainsaw. Evan David says, one of the first of many Ramones songs over the years to pay tribute to the devious joys of B-movie horror-style flicks. And then recently released Texas Chainsaw Massacre film in particular, this generally propulsive tune opens with the sound of a real-life chainsaw and has moreover since been heralded as the fastest tempo song on the whole album. All right, buckle up. After I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, we're going fast. Okay, from a guy that owns a chainsaw, that is not a chainsaw at the start. It's a circular saw like you would use in a woodshop class that you would like run a piece of wood through to split it. But either way, it's a saw. It's close enough. Basically, the guy's girlfriend's going to get taken away from him by the chainsaw, and he doesn't even care. So, a good song. Now we go to Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. Evan David says, a hopefully tongue-in-cheek depiction written by Dee Dee Ramone of the notoriously soul-crushing boredom of adolescent life that might well drive someone to what this title suggests. Tommy has since suggested that early on, or at least in comparison to their litany of I Don't Wanna songs, it was the only positive songs we had. We were all very frustrated. We escaped from our anger with humor. And Dee Dee would write with an almost Dada sensibility. Dee Dee himself, meanwhile, once said, perhaps in equally sardonic fashion, that, quote, I hope no one thinks we really sniff glue. I stopped when I was 8 years old. While going on to insist elsewhere that, quote, you can't sniff glue for more than a few months because your hair falls out and you can't do nothing and then you die. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue was an obvious joke. I bet people didn't take it that way back then. I bet you had people who got all upset, man. Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. I think this song perfectly sums up this album so far, right? It's just so simple lyrically, but it's just the sound, the melody, just the way it all comes together, because this is just the chorus. And then the bridge is 1, 2, 3, 4. Like, it's just the chorus, but it just works, man. We're almost to the halfway point of the album. We got I Don't Want to Go Down to the Basement. Returning to pulp horror movie territory, this eerily compelling tune manages to maintain a suitably sinister atmosphere that makes it a perfect choice to liven up any punky Halloween party. And if it hasn't been used as a soundtrack for one of these chase sequences in a Scooby-Doo cartoon yet, then it darn well ought to be. Interestingly enough, fellow punk pioneer Debbie Harry of Blondie fame has since suggested the song might have been partly inspired by the notoriously decrepit bathrooms at CBGB's, which was down in the basement. I mean, just the chorus repeated through. I don't want to go down to the bay. They don't even say it, but the longest song on here at 2 minutes, 40 seconds. Next up, we got Loudmouth. Evan David says a return to threats of cartoonish sitcom violence on the domestic front, and with unusually few lyrics, even by the Ramones standards, this deceptively simple but actually harmonically complex tune is a prime example of the hidden musical depths which would lead Arturo Vega, for one, to comment on how, quote, people like to say that the Ramones songs are very simple and that anybody can play them. I must have heard throughout the years probably hundreds of people playing Ramones songs, and nobody ever comes close to sounding like them. Punk existed because of the false assumption that the Ramones could be imitated. The Ramones were geniuses, musical geniuses. I mean, Eric Clapton's a great musician, but the Ramones are great artists who play great music. The best punk rock in the world. Lyrically, maybe the simplest song so far, but not sonically, right? But, well, you're a loudmouth, baby, you better shut up, I'm going to beat you up. Well, you're a loudmouth, babe. So that's the song, but, once again, a very well done song. Harmonically, it just kind of hits. So we have Havana Affair, a tongue-in-cheek tale of Cold War shenanigans apparently inspired by the Spy vs. Spy comic strip in Mad Magazine. This remains both something of a hidden gem as well as being one of my own personal favorite songs on the album, Evan David says. Not least because it captures the pure power of Tommy Ramone's drumming in particularly explosive fashion as it weaves this absurd spy movie-style spell on its listener. Yeah, nice little lyrics on here, a couple verses, some choruses thrown in there. The drumming is good as well, but I mean, you are just kind of taken in by the story, man. Next up, we have Listen to My Heart, another early example of Joey Ramone's emerging consummate skill at singing slightly twisted love songs. This post-mortem examination of a romance gone sour sees its singer defeated but unbowed in the wake of a breakup as he acknowledges that next time he will have to remain smarter in his approach to any future relationship, but nevertheless remains determined not to give up on love entirely, and that there will be a next time after all, for all of us, boys and girls. Very catchy with the next time. He'll listen to his heart, well, I'll be smart. And the verse, that girl could still be mine, but I'm tired of the hurt, I'm tired of trying, I'm tired of the pain, I'm tired of trying, I'm tired of crying. So, yeah, wasn't working out. Most of us have been in those sorts of things, but at least he's optimistic. He's being optimistic, boys and girls, that there will be that next time. Took a decidedly more serious turn on the next track, 53rd and 3rd, a sorely sick saga of presumably male prostitution and murder. The precise extent to which this powerful DD written tunes, lyrics, autobiographical remains at least somewhat up for debate to this day. Sort of. I've read some stuff that they're not really, but they're not really up for debate. What remains undebatable is the oddly compelling impact that a tune, which Everett True describes as, quote, a perversely upbeat anthem with an almost cross-eyed funk, can still have on its listener, as I hope you will agree. All right, 53 and 3rd, which was famous in New York apparently from the 70s through the 90s for homosexual prostitutes. I won't get into the story there. There is some more story to this. Probably some real life story to it, but catchy. It's about a very serious subject. He ends up slicing this guy's throat and killing him. But yeah, I mean, good. And a total different left turn, right? You never know what to expect on this album, which I think partly is why it's so beloved. 3 tracks left. We got Let's Dance, the first of many old school rock and roll covers to be given a Ramones twist over their 2-decade career. Much like Chris Montez's 1962 original version, this joyously high energy drums and Wurlitzer driven tune remains a powerful invitation to do exactly what it says in the title. I will spare you guys of that and stay seated. I thought they did a great job with that. It's so well suited to this style. So, yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot else to say about it, but, these kinds of things could go terribly wrong when you cover songs like this, but they did it fantastic. Penultimate track, I Don't Want to Walk Around With You. According to Everett True, this brutally succinct ode to exasperated rejection is, quote, pure West Side Story grit and heartbreak, and a perfectly encapsulated breakup song. What more needs to be said? And in verse 2, he switches up and says, I don't want to go out with you. But then we get back and I don't want to walk around with you. Just like all of it. Catchy. Now we get to the final track. Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World. Coming full circle to a rousing closing battle cry, and one which has over the years become perhaps even more notorious in the album's opening track for the seemingly fascistic nature of some of its tongue-in-cheek DD penned lyrics. It is perhaps worth bearing in mind that the version which was released on the album is in fact a somewhat watered down one, with its original opening line of I'm a Nazi, baby, I'm a Nazi, yes I am, being replaced by I'm a shock trooper in a stupor, yes I am, at the behest of the aforementioned and Jewish head of Sire Records, Seymour Stein. As Johnny Ramone later recalled, Seymour comes down to the recording thing asking, can you please stop singing I'm a Nazi, baby on Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World? And I'd go, what's wrong with that? And he'd reply, oh, come on, guys, please, for me. We reluctantly changed it, but we were compromising ourselves by not singing it. We didn't try to be crazy. We didn't try to write things that were offensive or shock value. These things were all natural. We were trying to be normal. I will say that I read that he was going to hold up the album if they didn't change it. So, and, sometimes we're not self-aware. Like, he was 100% right. Evan David says, controversial lyrics aside, however, the song itself nevertheless remains a potent evocation of what is singer Joey Ramone, who is also Jewish, by the way, once described as the unity between bands and fans. And while at this point it still remained to be seen as to whether the Ramones would ever conquer the charts, spoiler alert, No. The fact remained that with their truly iconic first album, they had crafted a supremely powerful statement of intent of what they wanted to achieve in terms of their musical legacy. See the rest of our upcoming Ramones album reviews in due course, dear listener, and judge for yourselves. But first, we got to finish this one. Well, they still got the word Nazi in their Nazi Schotschke, which is supposed to be Nazi sweetheart. An interesting way to end the album, and I know it fits into the punk. I don't know about writing about a Nazi, man, but, still really well done. Now we get to Evan David's favorite tracks. He says, my top 3 tracks, which in reverse order are 53rd and 3rd, Today Your Love, Tomorrow the World, and of course Blitzkrieg Bop. So the opener, the closer, and 53rd and 3rd. With honorable mentions to Havana Affair, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, and Beat on the Brat. All right, now we get to my favorite tracks. I'm going to have several of them. I mean, there's 14 songs on here, right? Honorable mentions, we'll go Listen to My Heart and Beat on the Brat. Faves are going to be Blitzkrieg Bop, I Want to Be Your Boyfriend, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue, Havana Affair, and Let's Dance. All right. Now we'll get to my overall score of this album. Listen, man, this album is freaking iconic. I mean, we all know it, right? We all know it. We know this album is fantastic. I have heard this album once, sort of, but I mean, I put First Reaction in the title because Trey and I did an album draft a few years ago. And so I listened to the top albums of every single year, but I was listening to 30 to 40 albums a week to film these. So I went through this album lightning fast. So I didn't really get to take it in. You don't really get to, you don't kind of understand the background of it. And I wouldn't, I was alive in 1976, but I was 5 years old. So I had never heard the Ramones really till we started this channel. I mean, they're just not in the mainstream. It's just not, where are you going to hear them? So it's kind of really like a first going through this. This album is brilliant. I wished I could transport myself to 1976 and hear this. Just like another album we got up, Nevermind the Bullocks, from the Sex Pistols. Like, you've got to kind of be there in that time to truly understand how iconic it is. But I'm going to be at a sky high 9.25 on this. If you watch this channel a lot, I don't give out many 9s. Like, they are very, very few and far between. I'm a tough grader. So fantastic. We are going to run the first 5 albums, like Evan David said. So got another one up next month. There'll be a Ramones playlist down below where the top 10 Ramones tunes that Evan David did a while back is up in that. All right, guys, let me know what you think of this album. Is it your favorite Ramones album? What do you grade it? And what are your favorite tracks? It's always hard to say, right? Because these tracks, this album's very similar sounding, the drumming and the guitar work, although they get more nuanced and complicated through certain songs. So it's like under 30 minutes of greatness, 9.25. Thank you again, Evan David. Until next time, guys, I will see you.